What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V. This is episode 217, and it is your 2022 5A end of the year awards. You know, a lot of people have been looking forward to this, and there's a lot to explain here on this one because I'm almost positive that there are a lot of guys, that gave it away, but a lot of people who have not listened to the past end of the year award shows for this year. I'm talking 1 through 4. Go ahead and listen to those if you haven't, but let me go ahead and run down how we do this thing here. So we have a couple award categories, as you probably saw on our Twitter account and Instagram. And to qualify, first off, we pick the candidates because we can. It's our show, so you could make your own show if you want to complain about it, which there has been plenty. I don't care. And on top of that, to qualify, it's basically based on regular season stats. Now, when we vote and there's a finalist who has been tearing it up in the playoffs, yeah, we'll definitely consider that when voting and doing our thing here. That's something that we're definitely gonna do. I mean, we got to, right? So there you go. But to qualify and become a finalist, we definitely consider regular season over anything. These were pretty much set almost a month ago, so there you go. Now, how the voting works here. So we got Newcomer of the Year, which goes to the best freshman performance on the varsity level, obviously. We have a Defensive Playmaker of the Year, Offensive Playmaker of the Year, Most Valuable Playmaker. All of those are pretty much easy to understand. And for each category, there are 5 total votes. I got a vote. Cody Stoffer, my co-host, has a vote. Our intern Gideon has a vote. You, the fans, have a vote. That's through Twitter, so whoever wins the majority of the Twitter vote gets the fan vote, which we'll be announcing first each time. And then our guy at Colorado Prep Red Zone, Ryan Wesley, also has a vote. He does a lot for Colorado high school football in general. He's been to multiple games, so he's more than qualified for this thing. Go ahead and check him out and check out Prep Red Zone. We'll make sure to tag them on our social media, so they'll be on Instagram and Facebook, and also you can just look it up online as well if you really want to check out his stuff. But he writes some great stuff. He's going to a lot of games. I'm pretty sure he is going to the 4A 5A state championship game, so there you go. But those are the 5 total votes here in an event of a tie here, which you don't get many, but just in case there is a tie, we're gonna go ahead and defer to whoever won the fan vote, or whoever got the majority of the fan votes out of the 2 candidates that are tied. So say both candidates tied haven't won the fan vote, whoever has the highest percentage, aka the most fan votes, will go ahead and win. That's how we break ties here on this end of the year award show. So there you go. But we'll talk about all of these awards, candidates. The point of this thing is to spotlight the great players from this last season and whatnot, and put some respect on their name, because I think that's the thing that matters here. And then on top of that, we're going to talk about our All Playmaker list, and I'll explain that process when we get there, so that we could just go ahead and get to the voting and get to the awards here. Now let's talk Newcomer of the Year. There were a lot of honorable mentions for this one. Tevin Stokes, the freshman quarterback at Chaparral, was one. Luis Santana out of Pomona was one. DJ Bordeaux out of Thunder Ridge, he was one, but he really didn't get to start until the playoffs, and so that's why we couldn't really consider him at the time. So there you go. Like I said, you got to put up stats and play a specific amount of games in the regular season to qualify. So just throwing that out there. Maxwell Lovett, I believe, out of Pomona was another one, another honorable mention. And then Breck Koloj out of Valor Christian. He is another one that we definitely had to consider here. He starts at line for Valor. That is just kind of a tough stat to put together because, I mean, obviously we've seen him play in person a couple times. Well, I've seen him play a couple times. Cody has seen him once. It's just hard to I guess, put down on paper, explain how well he has been doing. And so he's a little bit gypped out, but he's definitely somebody that we're going to put on our watch list, offensive line watch list going into next year. So he will live. But there you go. Those are all the honorable mentions. Let's go ahead and get into it here. Starting with Eli Stevens, the linebacker out of North Glen. Got the start here on the regular season. Had 71 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. Also forced 2 fumbles on the year. A couple big games that I do want to talk about here against Thornton, who they absolutely blew out. He had 11 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. Against Mountain Range, another big win. He had 11 tackles, a tackle for loss. To start the season against Adams City, had 9 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. Then against Doherty, I believe this was it was an important game, but he had 11 tackles in that game. And then in that Adams City game, by the way, he had 2 sacks. So there you go. Obviously stuffing the stat sheet at linebacker for North Glen, regardless of the competition, because I could already hear, oh, he's playing 4A competition. Doesn't matter. 4A is good at football. There are a lot of 4A programs that would blow out 5A programs, in my opinion. But that's an opinion for another episode. So there you go. Big credit to Eli Stevens out of North Glen for really turning up there. Now, another candidate I want to talk about, someone that we have been following for a couple years now. A couple of these guys we've watched actually in middle school, but we got Japri Jennings, the slot wide receiver out of Mountain Vista here. Shout out the junior buffs. But on the regular season, had 36 receptions, 400 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns here. Look, this is a very, very crowded receiving group here, and it's full with a lot of great receivers too. You got Sean Conway on this team. You got Ja'Kai Mack, who I believe was a candidate for Newcomer of the Year, in the same position as Japri last year. You obviously have the running backs as well, and so for Japri to walk in here as a freshman and do what he did is definitely impressive. You got to give him credit there. I mean, you got 2 other really good receivers who you're fighting for targets with. So it's a tough go. It's naturally a tough go. But he did his thing and he contributed to this team as a freshman. Now let me talk about some games where he really turned up here. In a game against University, which I believe is an Orlando team out of Florida, who they beat the brakes out of 42-0. He had 5 receptions for 82 yards. That's one of his best games. Against Castleview, I think statistically this is his best one, who they beat 38-21. He had 9 receptions, 97 yards, and a touchdown. You love to see that. Against Fort Collins and Chaparral, 4 receptions, 40 yards and a touchdown against Fort Collins. 3 receptions, 34 yards and a touchdown against Chaparral. I mean, he got pretty busy. There are a lot of games where he had multiple receptions. I believe the only game that he did not get more than 1 reception was the Heritage game, which was the first game of the season, and then the Thunder Ridge game, interesting enough, which was that rainy game, that double overtime game that was really intense. So there you go. He really did his thing, and it's only up from here. He's only going to get better. He's only going to develop that chemistry over there with Austin Modreski even more as the years go on. And so there's a lot to be excited for with Japri Jennings out of Mountain Vista, who already has been contributing a lot to that squad. Now, another guy contributing a lot to a passing squad isn't a receiver, but he is a running back, and that is Adrian Samala out of Arvada West here, a running back. On the regular season, ran for 598 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns here. Shout out to, I believe it's the Falcons. That's the squad I watched him play on, with Jameson, CC, Cam Jensen, all those boys. He stood out to me last year in the one game I went to where I scouted him, and he did a great job there. So there's no surprises that he walks into Arvada West and he got some play time, and he wasn't really the starter. They had a senior, I believe, starting he was more of a, change of pace type of guy, but his carries definitely went up and they gave him more burn as the year went on here. But even as he was not the starter in the first game of the season against a good Thunder Ridge defense, he had 25 carries, 95 yards, and a touchdown in that game doing his thing. Now, that wasn't his best statistical game. His best stat game was near the end of the season, October 20th against Pomona, who they absolutely beat 42-14. He had 19 carries, 118 yards, 3 touchdowns, also had a reception for 2 yards in that game. That's where he absolutely turned up in that one. Now, some other notable games I want to mention. Following that Pomona game against Ralston Valley, a tough squad, he had 17 carries, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Against Columbine, he had 92 rushing yards, which, you could argue maybe it was in garbage time or whatnot, but still, it's Columbine, it's not like they're just putting out scrubs out there, so there you go. Against Lakewood, he had 87 rushing yards. Boulder, who they blew out, he had 55 rushing yards. I mean, he turned up when they needed him. And going into next year, I mean, he is going to be one of the main engines to this offense, since they are graduating their quarterback, a couple starting wide receivers, their running back, some linemen, but they got a piece here in Adrian Samala, who is very good at football. He has experience from this year, obviously, and you see what he did against some pretty solid programs. I mean, look at Thunder Ridge, Columbine, Pomona, Ralston Valley. Gotta be impressed by that. You gotta be impressed by that. And that's, in a very pass-heavy offense that isn't really going to run the ball a lot like that. And even then, they also had a senior back that he was splitting carries with. So a lot of things to keep in mind there. You got to be aware of the situation. And speaking of situation, the last finalist I want to talk about is Brady Vodka. Now, he's been in this situation with Cherry Creek before. He's been in the Cherry Creek program for a couple years now. At the time I'm recording this, we're a couple days out. It is Wednesday, November 30th. In, I want to say 2 or 3 days, on the 3rd of December, Brady Vodka will be playing in the state championship game against Valor Christian. Now, last year, ironically enough, he was in the middle school championship game against some very good players as well, and so he has championship DNA in him naturally, and so he really had to fight for this starting spot. This was one of the guys that we had to make an exception for, because I believe he was a game under qualification, still played in 7 games. I mean, that's better than being under by 3 or 4 games and only playing 4 or 5 games. And so we made an exception for Brady Vodka here, and so he is going to be our last finalist. I mean, in case you don't know, he is the starting quarterback for Cherry Creek now, but he had to battle for it. There are some other very good options in the quarterback room. I'm talking about Brian Rudden, Ben Starr, who we saw work out over the offseason, Aurelio Marchiol, who we saw work out during the offseason, and then you have Brady as well. And Brady being the lone freshman, the lone underclassman, actually. He was able to win this job, not only win this job, but also do a good job leading this team to state. And I know everyone's gonna make excuses and be like, oh, it's easy to do that if you're Cherry Creek. No, it's not. Trust me, there are ways to lose, even if you're a great team. If you don't have a quarterback, not every team runs the ball a million times and just relies on that, even though they do have some good running backs. Cherry Creek actually tries to pass the ball and make that a part of their offense, and that's an important part of their offense. And so, with that being said, just talking regular season stats alone, Brady Vodka, 695 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, only 1 pick, pretty efficient there, 148 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. Some key games I do want to talk about. The first one where it looks like they just gave him the reins here and he started, was against Smoky Hill. He won 12 of 15, 183 yards, 3 touchdowns, so he only had 3 incompletions, but he made it up with 3 touchdowns in that game. Also had 39 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, so he actually had 4 total touchdowns in that game. Following that, against Eagle Crest, who has a very fast secondary, he went 11 of 17, 159 yards, 2 touchdowns to 1 pick. Also had 69 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown in that game. Following that, they played Arapahoe, a playoff team who had a bye, by the way. 9 of 15, 158 yards, 3 passing touchdowns in that one, no rushing touchdowns in that game. And then even in that loss against Grandview, 10 of 12 for 125 yards here. He had a rushing touchdown, but he had no touchdowns or picks. That was the game they lost by 3 in. Doesn't matter, as Grandview's not in state and Cherry Creek is now. In the last couple games, Brady has definitely turned it up, playing very efficient football, which is what matters. There are definitely ways to lose football games. So at quarterback for a very good team, even if you do have all the pieces. So there you go. That's Brady Vodka's argument. I mean, obviously he has done his thing over there for Cherry Creek, and we wish him the best of luck, and maybe even by the time they listen to this, they have already won or lost, so we'll see what happens. But let's go ahead and get to the votes here. Let's start with the Twitter votes. So we had 574 votes. Thank you for that. And the winner, and this was kind of by a small margin here, it was relatively close, but the winner is actually Adrian Samala out of Arvada West. He gained 33% of the Twitter votes. The next closest was Brady Vodka with 27%. Japri was right after him with 22%, and then Eli Stevens had a solid 18%. This is one of the closer polls that we've had in all of the classifications, at least this year, but especially when it comes to this category. So there you go. That's how deserving some of these candidates are. So there is that vote. Adrian Samala out of Arvada West getting that. Now let's go ahead and read out what Gideon has to say for Newcomer of the Year and read out his vote. So he says, Brady Vodka, Eli Stevens, Adrian Samala, and Japri Jennings. I have to go with Vodka. He won the starting QB job on a nationally ranked and one-seeded team. All 4 of these guys will be great moving forward, but I will vote for Vodka. So, boom, there you go. There it is split, well, between the 2 votes, between Adrian here and Brady. Let's go to Cody and see who he votes for.
Now, this is... It just varies so much from level to level on Newcomer of the Year. Obviously, have quite a few guys here. Even the honorable mentions, I think, have very, very bright futures at their program here. But I have to be the most impressed following watching film and, breaking down their impact on the team. I got to be most impressed by Japri Jennings' output here in his first year at Mountain Vista, where, there were a lot of passes to go around, if that makes sense. It was just absurd how many great pass catchers this Mountain Vista team has, how big a lot of these pass catchers are, because, Japri's not the tallest, but he is one of the most explosive athletes in the state, especially at his age here, and in just his freshman year, managed to be 3rd on this squad in total receiving yards, and he managed to also be 3rd in receptions here. And part of the reason why he's able to get so many receptions, and a stat that I wish was tracked a little bit more watching through his film, was first downs. Japri Jennings moves the chains so much by just running the route to the correct spot or having that, very, very quick acceleration that he's known for here. And, he dances too a little bit. He could dance maybe a hair less, but sometimes when he dances, he really does get that extra yard that you do need. He's very shifty. He's an absolute mismatch against not only linebackers and safeties when he's lined up in the slot, but he's asked to do a lot. He does line up outside. He does run those go routes, those post routes, those drag routes, those in routes, those slant routes, those screen routes. The variety of tasks that Japri is tasked with as a freshman is honestly stunning. in the first place, and it's very impressive everything he was able to accomplish here. He, like I said, is a great chain mover here, and he's a very reliable, I guess, like security blanket, running those drags across the field here, or running those shallow routes for Madrusky to come back to. And I think that Japri shows a very solid understanding of the game. There's one particular play where he's starting to run a fake flat / wheel-ish, and then just breaks down and cuts back inside on like a, U trail play, basically. And that alone just showed me a level of understanding and love and precisiveness for the game that I don't think I really saw looking through other freshmen's film, that I saw to that extent. Obviously, I think that the future is very, very bright for Brady Vodka, who's going to be playing in state this year as a freshman. So you got that going. Eli Stevens is, somebody who I think is going to be another stout North Glen defender here. You even look at our honorable mentions, for teams that I think are going to be turning it around in the next 2 years. And then Adrian Samala, huge shout out to him. He was the one that made this very, very difficult here, because he was the lead rusher on that Arvada West squad, and I think that the squad is his heading forward. But I do think that Japri's impact on a winning football team here that had one of their more successful regular seasons than they have in the past few years, I think that he was a critical part of that, and they would not have been where they were without Japri this season here. And, everything that he was able to do in not only some of these tight football games, but just overall on the season. And he's just getting started is the crazy part here. So my vote is going to go to Japri Jennings of Mountain Vista.
Boom. So there you go. 3 different finalists and 3 different votes. Let's go ahead and go to Ryan Wesley and see what he has to say here. But he is going to go ahead and vote for Brady Vodka. He says being the QB for the best team in the state is a challenge in itself, but doing so as a freshman is a tall order that he's managed to fulfill. He's had a solid introductory season by playing a significant role in helping Cherry Creek reach the state final. So there you go. Brady Vodka goes ahead and pulls ahead here. But I am going to go ahead and have to cast my vote for the 5A 2022 Newcomer of the Year, which is Adrian Samala out of Arvada West. And because it's tied, technically, you at home, it's 2-2. Gideon and Ryan here, Coach West, both voted for Brady. Myself and the Twitter votes have went for Adrian. And so that basically means that Adrian Samala is the Newcomer of the Year winner because he won the fan vote. That's how these ties go. So congrats to Adrian here. Now let me go ahead and explain what my reasons are for this. So first off, I respect Brady Vodka a ton. He's done a good job over there. He's had to win the starting job. It's not just about doing well against other opponents, because you're going to naturally do that if you play for a team like Cherry Creek. To play for a team like Cherry Creek, though, is harder to do than to compete against a team like Cherry Creek. It could be argued, at least it could be argued, because there are definitely guys in that program who have experience and who have went through the same program that Brady has. Brady has been in this program since middle school, but you also have other guys like Ben Starr, Rayleigh Markiel, who have been in similar situations. They've been through the program, but the difference is that they've had JV snaps compared to middle school snaps. And so for Brady to make that jump from middle school ball to varsity ball in less than a year and bring his team to state both years is a pretty big deal. He's a pretty big contributor. And like I said, Cherry Creek isn't a team that is going to run the football and die by running the football. They run at least a relatively balanced passing attack when they really have a quarterback and whatnot. I know the last couple years they've had to deal with one-year starters. Moving forward, there's going to be more passing involved here. Brady is not just going to be a guy who's just going to be regulated to game manager when things get tough. That's just not going to happen. And you see some of that here in the playoffs because he made some pretty big throws here. Like I said, we consider regular season performances for these candidates to qualify to become a finalist. Now, once they're a finalist, we're going to consider everything. And in the playoffs against Thunder Ridge, he made some big time throws that mattered. Obviously it helps to have an Ishmael Cece and all that, but, you still got to throw an accurate football, and it's not like Thunder Ridge defense sucks. They're here for a reason, and so he made some big plays there. I'm going to give him his credit. He did his thing there. Japri Jennings, he did his thing there as well. He has always been a very talented wide receiver. Now entering this wide receiving room as a freshman against other guys who, had more years catching footballs from this quarterback, even if it's just one more year and all that stuff, that matters. And Japri, he had to compete and carve a role for himself in this offense. And to me, that is extremely impressive as well. Eli Stevens, he did the same thing with North Glen. He had to carve a role for himself over at North Glen and compete against those guys to start. I mean, all these guys had to, right? But for me, the reason I am going to go ahead and vote for Adrian Samala here is that not only did Arvada West have a senior running back, or at least an upperclassman running back in front of him, they also are a pass-heavy offense, so they're not going to run the ball a million times. Not really if they don't need to, Now, with Adrian here, he was able to go into this situation knowing that if anything, he's maybe a change of pace back and all that stuff, and he still competed. He was still a dog, and he still got his carries. I mean, look, even if it was garbage time numbers that he put up, because I already know there's someone out there saying it. I could already read your lips right now. He did it against very good teams. You look at Columbine, he had 92 yards against them. That's pretty good. Backups or not, Columbine's backups are still better than starters on most 5A programs. That's right, 5A programs. So there you go. Thunder Ridge, that was a close game. That was a relatively close game there. He had 95 yards against a very good defense there. Ralston Valley, he had 78 yards. Pomona, Pomona it's a down year for them, but they really aren't that horrible of a program in general. He had 118 yards and 3 tutties against them. I mean, look, when it mattered, Adrian stepped up, and his film looks really good too. I mean, to play running back as a freshman is hard to do because you're playing against dudes who are physically more developed than you because they're older and whatnot. And on top of that, I mean, you have the scheme kind of going against you too. You're not a run-heavy team like a Columbine, like a Rock Canyon, like some of these other teams like Pomona who are going to use a million running backs and get all their guys touches. Like, no, at best, you have 2 running backs in this system. And even then, that's kind of pushing it because you're still going to pass it more so than anything. And so he carved out his role for himself. He competed against the guys in his own locker room. And then when it came down to it against good programs, he performed. And it matters. It matters to perform against good comp and whatnot. And so, look, got a lot of respect for all these guys. I think pretty much everyone in consideration here, and almost all the finalists are guys who are going to eventually play on the next level, and I've been sure of that for a really long time. It's going to sound out there, but come back to this episode in 4 years. I've been wrong about things, but I don't think I'm going to be wrong about this. And so a lot of respect to all these guys. I'm sure they're going to make this end of the year award show here in their respective categories here in the coming years. But for now, I got to go with Adrian Samala out of Arvada West as your 5A 2022 Newcomer of the Year. Now let's go ahead and move on to Offensive Playmaker of the Year. And I'm going to go ahead and address some controversy here. Had a lot of Rock Canyon fools try to come at our throats and slander us here, talking about, we're trying to make Aiden Duda look bad on purpose. First off, no. We put on athletes and whatnot, and we do a better job getting them to college than some programs, so maybe you should check yourself there. And then on top of that, we have a lot of respect for his game and whatnot, but things that go into consideration for Offensive Playmaker of the Year, Newcomer of the Year, D-Boy, MVP, is not only the stats, because, some people are a little bit too stat-driven, but it's also their performances, what we see on the film as well. And if we feel like your film is not up to speed and we're not quite bought into it, then, we're just not going to include you as a finalist. It's also our show, so we could do what we want as well. And there are a lot of great candidates. He was definitely somebody that was just on the outside, but let's not act like he was the only one on the outside as well. Yosef Ishmael Cece out of Cherry Creek, he was just on the outside, but we know he's a great athlete and whatnot. The stats weren't quite there for that. You also have Colton Pollock out of Fossil Ridge here. There was even a time where he had to play a little bit of quarterback, and he looked pretty decent. And so we're really looking forward to his game next year. But it wasn't quite there and whatnot. You also have Bryce Olsen as well. I believe that is Fort Collins, I want to say. Let me check it just to make sure. Sorry, Fossil Ridge as well. But there were a lot of dudes we considered. We also considered the other Columbine running back, Josh Snyder. We considered Diano Bonallo out of Ralston Valley. I mean, there are 4 spots, so there's only so much we could do here. Now, we'll acknowledge on that one graphic, Aiden Duda's stats, they were wrong. It was the one that they weren't wrong because we're looking at 50 players for literally one award. As you could tell, I just listed multiple honorable mentions that were not on the honorable mention graphic. So, boom. That's a mistake. But like I said, we already decided that he wasn't going to make it, and it was a hard decision to make, and so that's why he's an honorable mention. Now that that's out of the way, let's actually get back to the guys who actually made this list here. And if you disagree, you could disagree. Thank you for your listen, though. But let's talk about Diego Kearns out of Eagle Crest, the speedy running back. This guy definitely deserved to be on this list. Sure, second leading rusher in the state and whatnot. I'm sure that's something a lot of people are going to bring up. Still, though, in the regular season, rushed for 1,387 rushing yards, 11 rushing touchdowns. He was one of the big engines for this Eagle Crest team as a whole. He was very important to this special teams unit as well. But, he had some pretty big games here. Let me talk about his biggest game, his best statistical game against Lakewood, where he had 29 carries. He ran for 301 yards, 3 touchdowns, had a long of 63 yards, it looks like here. So there you go. Against Cherokee Trail, he had 223 yards and 2 touchdowns in that one. Another big game against Horizon, 210 yards and a touchdown in that one. I mean, he performed. He put up big numbers. His stats are definitely impressive, and his film is really impressive as well. There were a lot of times where he would just get loose and break out big chunks of yards, which really helped out this offense and whatnot, as they relied on him a ton to do their thing and get Eagle Crest back into the playoffs. So that's definitely worth mentioning there. Now, another running back I want to talk about is a junior here. It is Abraham Shatilla, the Rocky Mountain running back. On the year, he ran for 1,486 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns, leading Rocky Mountain into the playoffs. They actually got an upset in the playoffs as well, but those are just his regular season numbers. But he did a good job. I mean, he obviously helped this Rocky Mountain team get to the playoffs, but he was a big part of this offense. He was the main part of this offense, to be honest with you. He did not have a single regular season game where he ran under 100 yards. So every regular season game here, he ran for at least 100 yards. Now let's talk about some big games here. Against Chaparral, he had 214 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns in that one. Against Eagle Crest, 101 yards in that one. Against Horizon, 184 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. Against Fossil Ridge, 114 yards and a touchdown. Against Boulder, 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, look, he was the engine to this Rocky Mountain offense here, and he did a pretty good job. He did a pretty good job as a junior, running behind, obviously, a very good line led by senior Ethan Thompson. Shout out to him. But regardless, he got the job done. He got his team to the playoffs. He got a playoff dub, by the way, and you got to consider all of that. He did it all as a junior, the only junior on this list. Now, another guy to talk about, to give credit to, is Brady Witherspoon out of Arvada West here on the regular season. At receiver, he caught 62 balls for 1,136 receiving yards and 17 receiving touchdowns. All of those, he was a stat leader here in 5A, either the top guy or near the top there. I mean, he was a big part of this Arvada West offense, who is a very pass-heavy team. They love passing the ball, and he was one of those guys that really benefited from that. Now, let's talk about some games where he really turned up here. His best statistical game was against Lakewood. They blew them out 47-16, but he had 5 receptions, 247 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. You got to understand, as a receiver, you can't throw the ball to yourself, so all you can do is run your route and hope your quarterback finds you, and then you got to make do with the situations, with the opportunities you get. And here, it looks like he had 5 opportunities, 5 receptions, and he scored on 4 of those. That is absolutely insane to do against any varsity team. The next best stat game was against Chatfield, a playoff team. They didn't win this game, but he had 9 receptions, 212 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That means a third of the time he was scoring. That is big time there. The next best game against Cherry Creek, he had 10 receptions, 142 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. Cherry Creek won in a blowout, obviously, but Brady Witherspoon scored every single Arvada West touchdown in that game. Got to consider that. Now, some other key games against Thunder Ridge, who has a good defense earlier in the season, 6 receptions, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Against Columbine, 8 receptions, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns in that one. Against Ralston Valley, 5 receptions, 51 yards, and a touchdown. He did his thing. He definitely stuffed the stat sheet, and he performed. And, it's not like he's just running deep and catching a touchdown because, he is 6'4", 200 and a really good athlete. No, it's not that at all. You go ahead and look at the film. He's catching slant routes. He's catching screens. He's catching it over the middle on medium type of routes. He's doing it all, and he's scoring regardless because he is that guy here. He's one of the best receivers in 5A, period. So there you go there. That is Brady Witherspoon out of Arvada West. Now, the last candidate I do want to talk about is from Columbine. He made up half of the best running tandem here in Colorado, or at least arguably the best. You could give him that at least. But that is Mark Taylor out of Columbine, the senior speedy running back here. Definitely considered his running mate, but we had to go with Taylor here. I mean, he has very impressive film and all of that great stuff. In the regular season, 1,235 rushing yards, 24 rushing touchdowns. Yes, you heard that right. That is in the regular season alone. He was a touchdown leader in 5A and in the state as well. So that is Mark Taylor out of Columbine. Let's talk about some of his key games here before I forget. In one half against a very good, at least a very solid Dakota Ridge team from 5A. Remember, it's one half. He had 9 carries for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is not even his best statistical game. His best stat game came against Pomona, who they blew out. He had 17 rushes, 214 yards, and 5 rushing touchdowns in that one. So, love to see that. Against Chatfield, a little rivalry game here, he had 10 carries, 135 yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns. He really turned up. Oh, let me mention this other one against Arapahoe, 12 carries, 60 yards, and a touchdown in that one. I mean, he really turned up throughout the season and did a good job really carrying this offense for Columbine, doing a very good job for these Rebels and helping them make their deep playoff run or a good playoff run. So there you go. Those are all the finalists. Let's go ahead and go to Twitter. Let's see who won the vote here. And so we had 625 voters, 625 votes, and 32.8% voted for Diego Kearns out of Eagle Crest. This was a pretty close margin here, considering you had Brady Witherspoon who had 25%, Mark Taylor with 23%, and Abe Shatilla with 19%. These votes were pretty close here, but thank you to everyone who voted and all that stuff. Diego Kearns is your fan vote for Offensive Playmaker of the Year. Moving on, though, let's go ahead and see what Gideon has to say for his Offensive Playmaker of the Year vote. So he says, looking at all these players and teams between Diego Kearns, Brady Witherspoon, Abe Shatilla, Mark Taylor, my vote needs explanation. Columbine has 2 elite running backs. Arvada West had 4 guys with 3 receiving touchdowns. Eagle Crest had 7 100-plus yard receivers. Rocky Mountain had 1 100-plus receiving yard player. They have 3 guys who had 100-plus rushing yards. Their starting quarterback had 210 passing yards, and the backup had 148. My Offensive Playmaker of the Year vote carried his team on his back to the playoffs. Without him, the offense would not have even begun to have function. Abe Shatilla is the only reason the Rocky Mountain was able to stay offensively relevant this year. I vote Shatilla, so there you go. A split once again between 2 different finalists. Let's go ahead and move on to Ryan Wesley of Colorado Prep Red Zone. He is going to vote for Brady Witherspoon. He says leading wide receiver in 5A in yards, 5th in state. He's a big target with reliable hands and solid route running skills. Strong ball carrier, explosive after the catch. He's a legitimate game changer. So, 3 different votes. 3 different voters, 3 different votes. Let's see who Cody is going to vote for here.
Now, this category was almost impossible to narrow down here. There were so many great picks. Shout out to, honorable mentions who just narrowly didn't make this list. I'm talking about the Pollocks of the world, the Olsens, the Ishmael CCs, the Aiden Dudas that were really, really close as we were looking at stats at the end of the regular season here. And there were some really close ones here. These guys that did make the finalists were very, very crucial to their team here. Lots of running backs in 5A. That's just kind of the story here. You have really good arguments here for like a Chatia, where the Rocky Mountain offense was basically nothing outside of him here. A fantastic argument for Brady Witherspoon from a numbers perspective here, absolutely catching touchdowns every single week and exploding for multiple touchdown performances here. However, I'm going to cast my vote for Offensive Playmaker of the Year to Diego Kearns of Eagle Crest. I actually had the pleasure of going and watching him live in that loss to Grandview, where even though they quote-unquote had him bottled up, he was still very dangerous and even had, a touchdown regardless, thanks to his kickoff return prowess. I think that he's somebody who can score in a lot of ways. He's somebody who was, I'd even say, underutilized in the pass game. And when he was given opportunities, like against Rocky Mountain, he showed what he could do. 3 receptions, 82 yards, and his lone score. I think that with more targets in the backfield, this is somebody on the next level that could really dice up defenses. He's got elite speed. He has some of the most absurd agility I maybe have ever seen in my life. He just moves so smooth. He's such a great athlete. And honestly, he was the heartbeat of this Raptors squad. Even in games where they struggled, it was because the entire defense was keying in on him. And then you have just absurd performances like his 300-yard, 3-touchdown game against Lakewood. That's somewhat expected. But in league, getting 46 carries against Cherokee Trail for 220 yards is just ridiculous. And, even against loss against Creek, he's still the guy there trying to pick up yards and getting lots of carries and doing everything he can to scrap, fight, bite, tear for every single yard here. Very tough, splendid player to watch. Even if you don't include, his playoff, his postseason, he still had, well over 1,300 yards. From a rushing perspective, he still had, about 250 yards from a kick return perspective and, over 100 yards from, receiving the football as well. If you include the postseason, he actually even eclipsed 2,000 scrimmage yards, which is just absurd, bonkers, but really just everything he was able to do. He improved a lot from last year, and he was key to the, Raptors' return to the postseason. So that's why I'm going to take Diego Kearns for my offensive playmaker of the year.
Boom. There you go there. So Cody will go ahead and double down on Diego Kearns here. And so just to review the votes, Ryan Wesley voted for Brady Witherspoon, Gideon voted for Abe Shatilla, and your fan vote offensive playmaker of the year is Diego Kearns. I am actually also going to vote for Brady Witherspoon here. I'm going to explain my vote here first. Look, as a receiver, you have to make the most out of the opportunities you get. And sometimes you don't always get to control those opportunities and the situations, It's not like he wasn't being double teamed or anything like that. I got to see him play live here. They were doing their best, but Brady Witherspoon, he's just a very good football player, and he is somebody who is going to dominate wherever he goes. And so I was very impressed with what he was able to do there. He was a huge part of this Arvada West offense. I don't know if this offense would be the same without him, because he was just a one-of-a-kind receiver for them and the best receiver here in 5A, or one of the best here in 5A this year. And so with all of that being considered, I have to go with Brady Witherspoon as my vote. But because it is tied, 2 votes for Brady Witherspoon and Diego Kearns, we are going to go ahead and give the 2022 5A Offensive Playmaker of the Year award to Diego Kearns, since he has won the fan vote, who is super deserving, by the way. He's an explosive running back, super shifty. He's a home run hitter, so really he could score at any given moment and all that stuff. And he's done a lot for that Eagle Crest team. And so there you go. A lot of respect for him. And a lot of respect for all these guys in our honorable mentions. All these guys are players who we feel like can play on the next level and who we're going to push to play on the next level as well. And so there you go. A lot of great, fantastic football players here contributing on the 5A classification. Well, let's go ahead and keep this thing going and talk defensive playmaker of the year. Now, let me mention the honorable mentions real quick. There's obviously Isaac Angle out of Highlands Ranch. He was definitely somebody who was just out in this conversation. He had 155 tackles, 15 TFLs, 4 sacks, 5 picks. I mean, he did his thing, but, there are a lot of great candidates here. Joan Van Meter out of Fort Collins, a talented edge rusher who had 139 tackles. DJ Crow out of Denver East, he had 93 tackles. And then plenty more. There's plenty more who, we know is talented, but didn't quite stuff the stat sheet here. So there you go. But let's go ahead and talk about our finalists, starting with Brody Van Cleve, the junior out of Poudre here. On the season, 112 tackles, 18 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, 1 interception, 1 forced fumble, and 2 fumble recoveries. He did his thing for the Impalas who did make the playoffs and was a big part of this defense. Some key games here against Fort Collins. He had 14 tackles and 4 tackles for loss. Also had 3 sacks in that game. Against Fairview, which was a close 2-point loss, he had 9 tackles in that game there. Against Rocky Mountain. This was a rivalry game. He had 11 tackles and 3 tackles for loss in that one. I believe he also had 2 sacks. Yes. So there you go there. Against Castleview, which was a grinded out game, he had 12 tackles and a tackle for loss. No sacks in that one. And then last but not least, against Fossil Ridge, he had 11 tackles, 2 tackles for loss and 2 sacks, even though they did lose that game. He was also a big contributor in their one playoff game against the Legend, where he had 12 tackles, but unfortunately they came up short in that one. He is going to be a big time component of this team moving forward since he is only a junior. Now, another guy I want to talk about, he is an underclassman actually, so we have a couple young players still on this list, but it is Carter Daniels, the Mountain Vista linebacker, the sophomore linebacker here in the regular season. 161 tackles, 6 sacks, 30.5 tackles for loss here, 4 forced fumbles, and 5 fumble recoveries. He also had an interception as well. I watched him live against Thunder Ridge in the rain in double overtime. He put up one of the best performances at linebacker from the season. He was everywhere. You know, it looked like he was in on pretty much every single run play, it felt like, whenever they did run the ball towards his side, at least. And even then, there were times where they didn't run it towards his side, and he would still clean it up in that game. He had 20 tackles and 5 tackles for loss. That is probably, and half a sack, that is probably one of his best statistical games. Obviously, they lost by only 3. That was a really close game, though. So, there you go. Against Rock Canyon, though, he would make it up with 20 more tackles and a tackle for loss and a sack. Jeez, man, he went on a tear here in that 2-week span. Against Castleview, he had 17 tackles and 4 tackles for loss after that. I mean, look, Carter Daniels, he is a tackle machine. He did a good job. I'm also going to mention he had 13 tackles against University, that Florida team, by the way. But anyways, Carter Daniels, he is an absolute beast for this Mountain Vista team. He's going to stuff the stat sheet. And, you know, he plays just good football. He has a nose for the ball. He's going to go ahead and stop the ball carrier. And he has a very good IQ there. This is a kid who's been starting since his freshman year. I believe he was a Newcomer of the Year candidate last year as well. So no surprises that he makes our end of the year award show once more as a defensive playmaker of the year. One of the best linebackers here in the state. Speaking of the best linebackers in the state, we got Hayden Moore out of Regis Jesuit here. The 3-star, committed to Nebraska as of right now here in the regular season. He had 167 tackles, 6 sacks, 17 hurries, 13 tackles for loss, as he was the anchor for this Regis Jesuit team. Another guy who just tallied up a bunch of tackles here. Let me talk about some key games. His best stat, his best stat game was against Fountain Fort Carson, where he had 26 tackles and 4 hurries. Wasn't quite able to get to the quarterback. Doesn't matter, though. He still did his thing. Next to that, against Arapahoe, who they beat, he had 19 tackles and 2 tackles for loss in that game. Against the Legend, he had 22 tackles and a sack in that game. Against Cherry Creek, which I watched him play in, he had 12 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. I mean, look. Oh, real quick, Pine Creek, that's another game I watched him live in. They won that game. He had 14 tackles and a sack in that one. I believe he had an interception in that game as well. He went ballistic in that one. I mean, look, there's a reason he's going D1. He is a tackle machine. He is one of the best in the entire state. The stats speak for themselves, and the performances in these games definitely speak for themselves. In the 2 games I watched him in, one he won, and the other he lost by kind of a lot. There was really no doubt after those 2 that he would be a defensive playmaker of the year candidate. So, boom, there you go. Now, the last candidate we got to talk about is Cherry Creek's very own 4-star outside linebacker. You know who it is. It is the Oregon commit Blake Purchase. On the regular season, 43 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 15 sacks. He leads the entire state in sacks regardless of the classification, I'm pretty sure. So there you go. He was a big part of this Cherry Creek defense that has been so dominant these last couple years. A big part of why they're going to state as well, and have won state in the past. I mean, he was a baller this season. Also had 8 pass deflections. Those 8 pass deflections also include the playoffs, by the way. There you go. Just throwing that out there. But the stats I just read off were all regular season stats. I mean, he has been on an absolute tear this season, and they've just unleashed him against opposing quarterbacks here. In the past, I know they've dropped him into coverage a little bit more and whatnot this season, and really felt like, hey, go get yours, go get the quarterback, and we'll do the rest. And that is what he has done, as he has been virtually unblockable here. Has had a sack in almost every single game this season. But let's go ahead and talk about some of his bigger performances here. Against Ralston Valley to start the season, he had 7 tackles and a sack in that one. His best stat, I guess, game probably was against Chatfield, though. He had 4 tackles in that one, but he had a season high 4 sacks in that game. Against Regis Jesuit, who I saw him play live, he had 6 tackles, but 2 sacks in that game. One of those sacks was a real nasty hit too, by the way. In that Grandview game, which even though they lost, he still had 4 tackles and 2 sacks, going up against a D1 left tackle there, who he's probably going to go face-to-face against in the Pac-12, since, he committed to Oregon, and that tackle Henning committed to Washington. So that'll be interesting to see what happens. But, Blake Purchase, he has turned up this season. He has been part of the best defense here in 5A and probably in the entire state. Best of luck to him and all those guys playing in the state championship game here. And so there you go. Those are all of your finalists. Let's go to Twitter and see who won the fan vote. And while this is not super close here, but there were 541 votes and 47.5%. Yes, that is almost half of the votes went to Blake Purchase out of Cherry Creek. 28% went to Hayden Moore, and then 13 to Carter Daniels, and 11 to Brody Van Cleve. So there you go. Can't really argue with those numbers. Let's see what Gideon has to say about Defensive Playmaker of the Year. He says, all of these candidates are worthy. Blake Purchase, Hayden Moore, Carter Daniels, and Brody Van Cleve are all great, and we had to make insane cuts to narrow it down to the final 4. Here's how I see it. 2 of these guys play on defense by committee teams, so then it is down to Brody Van Cleve and Carter Daniels. I have to give the slight edge to Daniels. Statistically and team record-wise, it makes sense. Daniels has more tackles, more fumble recoveries, and more forced fumbles. Van Cleve has twice as many sacks and plays about the same role on the team, proportional to everyone else. At least that's how I see it. However, Van Cleve should be back again next year with Daniels. I want to see Mountain Vista and Pooter face off next season if they play in FOCO, and I'll be there. As we all know, Gideon, he is currently at CSU, and so he handles most of the games up north. So that's what he means by that. But there you go. Once again, 2 different voters, 2 different candidates. Let's go ahead and see what Cody is going to do and who he is going to vote for.
Per usual, we have some, ranked prospects even in this Defensive Playmaker of the Year conversation here. Obviously, you have guys who are going to keep doing it for a couple more years. Would not be surprised if Daniels here isn't a DPOY candidate for the next couple of years here. Brody Van Cleve had himself a very, very solid season as well. But I think it comes down to 2 edge rushers of 2 of the top programs in 5A. Maybe not one of them is the best program in 5A, and the other one, maybe not the best, but one of the top programs in 5A from Regis and Creek here. Hayden Moore obviously leading the state in tackles at the end of the regular season, and then eventually becoming the state leader in tackles when Regis is eliminated in the postseason. But just based off of regular season stats, the amount of hurries and tackles for losses that he have are plentiful. They're plentiful, right? However, I think I gotta cast my vote for the highest rated recruit in the state of Colorado here, and that is Blake Purchase, whose versatility and dominance just gives so much leeway to this Cherry Creek squad here. You look at when he was able to turn up, he shines bright in the brightest moments here, but has been so consistent, against a 4A state champ in Chatfield that I think is honestly an underrated 5A program here. He tallied 4 sacks, and then from there would not record less than a single sack for the rest of the regular season here. He's also getting up there. He's causing pass deflections, and I'd even say that, he's operating on like a reserve here. This Cherry Creek defense, there's not a lot of tackles to go around. There's dudes on every single level here. But also from an offensive standpoint, I don't see teams run away as much from any other player in the state as they run away from Blake Purchase. He's running across the field to make these tackles. He is, blowing up plays that are going the other direction to record not only these tackles, but these tackles for loss that he's recorded where, he had 8 to end the regular season. He's only continued to dominate in the postseason. Granted, that's, only part of it here too. I'd also say that Hayden Moore was capable of doing that and also turned up in the postseason. But really, Blake Purchase is just on another level of teams are actively running away from him. And so I think that when you are able to influence not only, the game and your matchup, but you're able to influence a scheme perspective, and you're able to influence how offensive coordinators will call their plays for a game based around you as a strength, and opening up those other opportunities for guys on the defensive line. I think that's what makes you the defensive playmaker of the year. Just being purely dominant when you are given the opportunities, and also making opposing teams shake in their boots. My pick for defensive playmaker of the year is Cherry Creek's very own Blake Purchase.
So boom, there you go. That is 2 votes for Blake Purchase. Might as well make it 3, as Ryan Wesley of Prep Red Zone will go ahead and vote for Blake Purchase. He says the state's leader in sacks is a force to be reckoned with, and that undoubtedly alters every offensive game plan. There's a reason why he had a bunch of offers to top tier programs before committing to Oregon. He's arguably the best player in the state. And I'll have to agree, because I'm also going to vote for Blake Purchase, who is your 2022 5A Defensive Playmaker of the Year. Look, I'm pretty sure he made this list last year, or at least he was just short of it. But this year he left with no doubt. In the game that I saw against Regis Jesuit, he did his thing, man. He was a force to be reckoned with. And, that was every game. It wasn't just the one game I saw or whatever, he did that every single game. He was a force in pretty much every single game here. And it's not like teams are not trying to, not block him and stuff. He's getting double teamed, chipped, triple teamed. They're trying to throw him out of the equation by running all of these plays specifically to take him out of it. And regardless, he is still making plays, and that's on a stacked squad. And, I think, in my opinion, playing on a stacked squad and being the best player on that squad says a lot, because out of all the guys that other offensive teams, not just offensive teams, but all teams have to worry about, he is the guy that you got to focus on and whatnot. He is the guy that you don't want to have him beat you and whatnot. And so, a lot of respect for everyone who made this list. I do expect a couple of these guys to continue to make this list here in the next couple of years. But I got to go with the senior outside linebacker, the Oregon commit, the Cherry Creek guy, the potential 2-time state champ, Blake Purchase. By the way, that's potential two-time state champ as a starter, Blake Purchase. Now let's move on to most valuable playmaker. We got a couple guys that were definitely in consideration for this. But let's start with Zach Lewis, the linebacker and senior running back out of Fairview here. In the regular season, he had 967 rushing yards, 12 rushing touchdowns. Also had 108 tackles and 15 tackles for loss. I mean, this kid did it all for Fairview. He was one of the engines for this team here. Let's talk about some of his best stat games here. Against Pooter, he had 142 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Also caught 2 receptions in that one. On defense, he had 7 tackles and a tackle for loss here. That was a very close 2-point game that Fairview won. So there you go there. Against Boulder in that rivalry game, 110 yards, rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. He also had 7 tackles and a tackle for loss. Defensively against Valor Christian, he did a good job. He had 18 tackles and a tackle for loss in that game on the ground. He had 83 yards still, which was pretty solid against them. I mean, regardless, Zach Lewis, he has been a captain for this team for a reason, and he has been one of the best athletes on this team, and he really performed this season, so no surprises as to why he is an MVP finalist. Now, another guy that played a similar role to Zach Lewis is Mason Miller, the Pine Creek running back and linebacker. He is only a junior, but man, did he perform here in the regular season. 1,110 rushing yards. He had 42 tackles, 2 picks, 2 forced fumbles, as he was a very good linebacker as well, playing both ways. And for us, that is obviously of big value. Now, some games, well, his best statistical game that I want to talk about first here was against Vista Ridge, that rivalry game. He had 181 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns just on offense in that one. But he also had 5 tackles and a game-sealing interception in that Vista Ridge football game. Another game I want to talk about against Mullen, he had 151 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Also tagged on 3 more tackles against Regis Jesuit. Even though it was a blowout, he still had 101 rushing yards and a touchdown. That definitely counts for something, and 3 tackles in that game here. Against Valor Christian, 72 yards and a touchdown and 10 tackles on defense. He popped off in that game, even though they lost, but that was a much closer game than it looked. So just keep that in mind there. Regardless, Mason Miller, he's had some very great performances on both sides of the football, and that's why he is a most valuable playmaker candidate. Now, another finalist I want to talk about is also a junior, and that is the quarterback of Grandview, Liam Zarka. He was the engine to this Grandview offense who, they lost a couple guys last year. And so Zarka, he came in and he led this team to a top seed in the playoffs in this regular season, passed for 1,753 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, only 8 picks. Also rushed for 478 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns, being accountable for 28 touchdowns for this excellent Grandview team here. Now let's talk about some games where he really stepped up here. For me, the first one that comes to mind is the Fruita Monument game, which they won in double overtime, I believe. In that game, he had 171 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, only 1 pick. Also had the game-winning 2-point conversion, if I'm not mistaken, in that one. So, boom, there you go. Against Cherry Creek, who he beat, he went 12 of 19 for 112 passing yards, and then also ran the ball for 61 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in that big-time upset there. His best statistical game I would say, was probably against Fossil Ridge, where he threw for 243 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, also had 92 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown in that game. Before that, against Overland, he had a solid game as well, where he threw for 192 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also ran for 107 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Regardless, Liam Zarka has done a lot for this Grandview team and was super valuable for the squad, which made, I guess, that loss, or well, his loss, because he did get injured here in the playoffs, big deal for this Grandview squad, because like I said, he really led this team. He had a relatively new group of receivers, new running back, and all of that, and so with all of that, he still overcame that and led this Grandview squad to a bye, at least here in the playoffs, which definitely matters. Now, the last guy I want to talk about is Austin Majeski out of Mountain Vista, the sophomore quarterback, believe former Newcomer of the Year candidate. He passed for 3,101 passing yards, 32 touchdowns to 9 interceptions here in the regular season here, taking a huge step forward as a sophomore. I mean, he had 2 games where he passed for over 400 yards here. One of those he won, which in that one he won, it was that Hail Mary pass he threw it was in regulation against Rock Canyon, which allowed Mountain Vista to go ahead and win that game as a buzzer beater touchdown was thrown by Austin here. And so in that game against Rock Canyon, let me just talk about that one. 27 of 42 for 460 yards, 6 touchdowns, finding a bunch of different receivers for a touchdown in that one, if I remember correctly. And like I said, even though I worded it kind of poorly, he had the game-winning touchdown in regulation to win that game. Now, the other game where he threw for 430 yards, over 400 yards, was against a Legacy where they lost 28-41. But he threw 22-38 for 437 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, did throw 2 picks in that game, but, still did his thing for the most part there. Some other notable games I want to talk about here against Castleview. He avenged that loss from last year, 29-46, 268 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. Against Fort Collins, 21 of 28, 328 yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Chaparral, 19 of 25, 351 passing yards, 4 touchdowns to only 1 pick in that one. Against University, a team from Orlando, 17 of 21, Orlando, Florida, that is. 17 of 21, 313 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns. I mean, he was lighting up the state, and he is one of the lead passers in the entire state, right behind Braden Dorman, I believe here. So there you go, a QBR rating of 113.5. So big part of this Mountain Vista offense, obviously, and he took a huge step forward for them in that. But let's go ahead and go to the Twitter votes here one last time and see who won MVP, at least fan vote MVP. And with the 644 votes, 40.1% of those went to Zach Lewis, the fantastic athlete out of Fairview. So boom, there you go there. The next closest was Liam Zarka with 29%, followed by Austin with 21%, and then Mason Miller with 9%. So there you go, Zach Lewis wins the fan vote. Let's see what Gideon has to say here one last time. So he says, Austin Majeski, Liam Zarka, Zach Lewis, Mason Miller are all worthy candidates. In my mind, MVP comes down to who carried their team most. You all know how I like my two-way players. I like quarterbacks, but I'll give it to Zach Lewis. I know what it takes to beat all 4 major Fort Collins teams. Foco High School wasn't great this year, but whooping Rocky Mountain, Pooter, and Fossil, who are all playoff teams, by the way. Then he has a bunch of question marks and exclamation marks following that. And doing it in style. Lewis's best game of the year was against Pooter. MVP, honorable mention, Jordan Neeson, and Depoy finalist Brody Van Cleve. He had 142 yards on 25 carries and a touchdown in that 2-point win Fairview then whooped Fossil Ridge, and Lindenwood commit Tyler Kubat. He had 7 tackles in the Pooter game and 120 on the year. Their last playoff game stats haven't been entered yet, but I'm willing to bet that he performed well. So there you go. That is 2 votes for Zach Lewis here. We're going to go ahead and switch things up here and see what Ryan Wesley has to say about most valuable playmaker. One last time, make sure you go ahead and check Prep Red Zone and his content there. But he is going to vote for Austin Majewski out of Mountain Vista. He said, finished first in passing yards on 5A, second in state. Big time arm and impressive footwork in the pocket, especially for a young QB with his height. One thing that really stands out about him, besides his talent as a passer, is his composure. His ability to keep a level head makes him a methodical passer that is difficult to stop. So there you go. That's 1 vote casted for Austin Majewski, 2 votes going for Zach Lewis. Let's go ahead and see what Cody has to say about MVP.
In what is one of the more interesting races here, the most valuable playmaker one. This one is a tight one because, you have guys who sniffed around 40 total touchdowns in Liam Zarka. Obviously, the two-way prowess of Zach Lewis and Mason Miller is very, very enticing with how well those running backs / linebackers dominated. And then you have Austin here of Mountain Vista, who, led the state in passing at points in the season, and I think at the end of the regular season, maybe even was the leading passer here as only a sophomore. And it makes it very difficult, don't get me wrong, but ultimately, we choose one at the end of the day, and the one that I have to go with is going to be Mountain Vista's very own Austin Majewski here. The 32 touchdowns, over 3,000 passing yards in the regular season here, led this Mountain Vista squad to have just a very potent offense. Definitely his arm opened up opportunities in a run game that also got over 1,300 yards and quite a few touchdowns here. But something that I find very impressive about Austin's performance, especially, considering that he's only been a starter for 2 years, is that he managed to pass touchdowns to 8 different receivers this year, and 8 different receivers all caught over 100 yards. It was very well spread. He saw the entire field for what it was. He got his guys opportunities in open space. He would lead them well on routes, and I think that, he just did such a splendid job of being not only the catalyst of this Mountain Vista offense, but I'd also say the face of this Mountain Vista squad here, who, has so many candidates in so many categories, but really, Mountain Vista here just really shined in a lot of ways and even competed for league, against teams that maybe don't take Mountain Vista as seriously. They barely lost to Thunder Ridge in double overtime, and Austin Majewski Hail Mary helped lift them over Rock Canyon. They were keeping pace in a foot race with Valor Christian. So I think that, you look at Austin here, and he's a huge reason why they are in so many of those games and why this team averaged nearly 36, 37 points a contest here. So, huge congrats to Majewski here for, his work this year, his development especially. I know that, he's a very humble guy, and, he's a stabilizing presence in a locker room here. And, I think that also contributes to being a most valuable playmaker. If you've heard some of our other debates and discussions, Majewski, both on and off the field, is very solid, absolutely wonderful, and, he's my vote for most valuable playmaker.
So there you go. That is the second vote for Austin Majewski out of Mountain Vista here. It's tied 2-2, 2 for Zach Lewis, 2 for Austin Majewski here. My vote is actually between the both of these guys, so my vote will be the winning vote here. But I'm going to have to go with the Mountain Vista quarterback, Austin Majewski. Look, love Zach Lewis. I think he's a great football player. I think he's an excellent athlete. Somebody who is probably going to make our top 5 seniors linebacker list. Be on the lookout for that. That'll be coming out soon here. here in the next couple weeks probably. But, I got to go with the quarterback here, one of the best quarterbacks in the entire state. I mean, he really led this team here, and I don't know where Mountain Vista would be if he was not their quarterback, honestly. He's won them games, I think that is undeniable. And when they needed him most, he's usually come through. Even in that Thunder Ridge game, I mean, he gave them a 21-point lead, basically, which, they blew as a team. I'm not just going to blame him for that. But, he's still developing, and he's only a sophomore doing these things. I think that's also worth noting as well. Going into next year, obviously that bar is going to be raised. We'll see what happens there, but I think the bar was raised for him going into this year, and he exceeded those expectations, and he won them games, and he got them back to the playoffs again. And so you got to keep all of that in mind. And so that's why Austin Majewski, the sophomore quarterback out of Mountain Vista, is your 2022 5A most valuable playmaker of the year. So, boom, there you go. Also, I realized I didn't talk about honorable mentions. I'm going to mention them real quick. Diano Bonallo out of Ralston Valley, he was definitely an honorable mention here. Jordan Neesett out of Pooter, he was definitely an honorable mention. He had a great year playing both ways here. Just off the top of my head, Trey Stott out of Valor Christian is probably another honorable mention here. I mean, there are a lot of guys that could have been mentioned who are also DPOY candidates as well, but there could only be one. And so that wraps up these awards. Let's go ahead and move on to the All Playmaker list. Okay, so let me go ahead and explain how our All Playmaker list works. So it is decided between myself, Cody, and Gideon. We literally sat down at a table and talked it through, talk about guys who deserve this recognition from us. And so to make the list, not only do you have to have the stats, but you also have to have played at least 8 games, and so if you haven't played 8 games, then you're not on the list. You're cut from consideration, basically. On top of that, we definitely weigh in heavier on players that we've seen in person. We've been to plenty of football games, and so we definitely keep that in mind. And the players we haven't seen in person, I mean, obviously we have access to film, not just highlights, but game film as well. Shout out to FanView and NFHS for all of that. So that's how we make these decisions. And on top of that, the key thing here, because everyone's going to be like, oh, I made All-State and whatnot, which is cool. That's great to make All-State, but also All-State doesn't have position limits, as in they take, however many players they want. For this list, we have a specific number of athletes who could take for every position, so that we have to make tough decisions. All right, and so let me just go ahead and go down the line here. So we take one athlete. That's a person that has to play both ways. Has to. So, boom, there you go. Then we take 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, only 1 tight end, which was tough because there are a lot of great tight ends here. 2 offensive tackles, 3 interior linemen. So those are guys who play guard, center, whatever, 2 defensive tackles. So interior defensive linemen, 2 edge rushers. It doesn't matter if they play defensive end, outside linebacker, whatever. As long as they were coming off the edge for the majority of the season, they're on here. So there you go. We took 2 linebackers, inside linebackers mostly, that is. 3 cornerbacks, 2 safeties, 2 kickers, and 1 punter. So there you go. I'm going to go ahead and just read off this entire list here, and then I'll talk about guys who just barely missed, our thought process, and all that stuff. So, at quarterback, we got 2 here. We have Austin Majewski out of Mountain Vista, the sophomore, and Liam Zarka, the junior quarterback out of Grandview. At running back, we have Aiden Duda out of Rock Canyon, the senior, you're welcome, and Diego Kearns out of Eagle Crest, another senior running back. At wide receiver, we have the senior receiver out of Arvada West. That is Brady Witherspoon. We also have Trek Keyworth from Fossil Ridge. He is a senior as well, I believe. And then we got Solomon Latimer out of Doherty. He is the lone junior to make this wide receiver group. So there you go. At tight end, we took Josiah Stevens Silva, the Fountain Fort Carson senior tight end. At offensive tackle, we took Zachary Henning, the Grandview senior, and Ethan Thomason, the Rocky Mountain senior. And then here at guard/center, there are a lot of candidates for this one, but we went with Hank Zelinskis, the center out of Cherry Creek, Tanner Morley, the guard out of Valor Christian, and Tanner Ragus, I want to say, excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, I'm so sorry, out of Pine Creek. Now at defensive tackle, we went with the senior Brody Bleak out of Valor, the senior Gavin Taylor out of Legend. Then at edge rushers, we have two seniors here, Blake Purchase out of Cherry Creek and Hayden Moore out of Regis Jesuit. At linebacker, we decided to go with Isaac Engel out of Highlands Ranch and Carter Daniels, also out of Highlands Ranch, but out of Mountain Vista High School technically. And then at cornerback, we went with Jordan Neeson, the senior from Pooter, Ramon Pacheco, the junior from Pine Creek. And then we also went with his teammate Justice Nicholson, the junior from Pine Creek as well. At safety, we went with Cam Warm Chapa, the junior safety from Eagle Crest. And then we went with Logan Brantley, the senior from Cherry Creek. So boom, there you go there. Now our two kickers, we have Joel Lopez out of Fort Collins. He is a junior. And Bryce Olson out of Fossil Ridge. He is a senior. For our punter, we went with Jonathan, I believe it's pronounced Sykes, out of Denver East. He is a senior. And then our athlete goes to Zach Lewis, the senior from Fairview. So boom, there you go. That is our 2022 5A All Playmaker team. A lot to talk about here. Let's just go down the line. Let's start at quarterback here. At quarterback, I feel like this was pretty obvious here. I mean, Austin Modreski, obviously he just won MVP, so he made it. Liam Zarka was an MVP candidate, so he was on here. Other guys we considered, Ethan Cook from Arvada West was there. Xander Carroll from Regis Jesuit was definitely considered, along with Logan Madden out of Ralston Valley. John Brookhart was somebody that, by the way, quarterback from Legend, he was somebody that we were considering, but the stats weren't quite there and he was hurt, so he got eliminated in a couple different ways there. And then we had Colton Pollock out of Fossil Ridge. No disrespect to Tyler Kubat. I mean, he would have been, not considered at all because he missed almost half the season here. But Pollock here, I mean, he really turned up. And he played running back, but he also played quarterback. And so we went back and forth. He's a young guy. He's going to get his chance later. So, boom, there you go. Now, at running back, there were a million options to go with here. I'm sure the biggest question you're asking is how did Aiden Duda make the All Playmaker list, but he didn't make our award list? Well, in our opinion, we felt like Mark Taylor from Columbine, he was somebody that had an excellent season, arguably a little bit of a better season. His film was just a little bit more impressive to us. The reason Mark Taylor didn't make our All Playmaker list was because he also had Josh Snyder on his team, and so running back duos, I mean, they never really do well. You can look at our past All Playmaker teams from this year. We don't really include running backs who were in a committee, or at least not really. So there you go. That's also why Carlson Bubba Tan from Creek, along with Jordan Heron, weren't on here. Diano Bonalo, I know he wasn't in a committee, but he was someone we considered. Mason Miller, obviously, from Pine Creek was in there. Donovan Vernon from Grandview was considered. Abe Shatilla, obviously, from Rocky Mountain. We had to consider him for Offensive Playmaker of the Year. I think he had a great season, but, when it is as close as it is here, we usually go with seniority, and then after that, I mean, it just comes down to decision making. Like I said, we literally sat down at a table between the 1A state championship game and 2A state championship game to decide this All Playmaker team. The end of the year awards were decided after the regular season, so just keep that in mind here. All right, so there you go. But we decided that Aiden Duda and Diego Kearns were our best options for this list. Obviously, there are a million honorable mentions, ones that I just mentioned and ones that I haven't mentioned yet, but we considered a lot for this one, as 5A loves to run the football. Now, at wide receiver, it was pretty obvious. I felt like Brady Witherspoon for sure was going to make this list. I think that was an easy one here. Solomon Latimer out of Doherty was somebody who we all kind of agreed should make this list. I mean, he has had some excellent games. He might be one of the best receivers here in this next class here, in the class of, I think he would be 2024. He's a talented guy. And so we felt like he definitely deserved to make this list. And then we had Trek Keyworth. He had to make this list as well. I mean, he was a big part of this Fossil Ridge team and their success, who had 2 different quarterbacks throwing to him, but he still almost caught for 1,000 yards and caught over 10 touchdowns. So that was definitely impressive. Other guys we considered: Ja'Kai Mack, Sean Conway, Braden Monroe was a close one, Nicky McGuire, DeAndre Barnes from Regis Jesuit was a real close one, Jordan Rochelle from Fairview, Ishmael Cece was definitely a close one, but with this one, at least in this specific category, we decided to go with seniority and stats for the most part here, and obviously value to the team, as well. So boom, there you go. This was another tough one, but like I said, that's why we have position limits. We were forced to make tough decisions, so you could kind of see where our opinions truly lie here. So yeah. Now at tight end, a lot of great options: Simon Kibbe from Grandview, Alex Turpin from Vista, Drew Rollman from Chatfield. Obviously, you have the CU commit and Andrew Metziger from Regis Jesuit, and Colton Mills Younger from Pooter. We decided to go with Josiah Steven Silva because, I mean, first off, the stats speak for themselves. And on top of that, he played a very big role for Fountain Fort Carson here. We have a top 5 tight end senior list coming out here. I would encourage y'all to listen to that episode whenever it does come out, because I think it'll kind of help justify this pick. Shout out to DeAndre Horn, by the way. But Rock Canyon runs the ball, so they kind of did him a little bit of a disservice. If they were more of a balanced team, then he definitely probably would have been that guy here in this position. So there you go. At offensive tackle, this was the one we had the least debate about. Zach Henning and Ethan Thompson, both elite tackles for their teams in Grandview and Rock Canyon respectively. It was pretty obvious. I mean, Gideon, he saw Thompson play, I believe. Cody saw Henning play, and there is no doubt that they had to make this list. So boom, there you go. Speaking of guys who are locked in, Hank Zelinskis out of Cherry Creek, he plays guard, offensive lineman for them. He was for sure going to make this team. So there you go. Now, the last 2 spots were kind of close here. Tanner Morley out of Valor Christian. He's moved around on the line, but we decided that we had to include him because of Valor. They've had a pretty successful run game as the season has went on, so that's a little bit of a tribute to them and their success here. Also, best of luck to them at state. Then we eventually decided on Tanner Regis for Pine Creek here. Other guys you considered was Connor Laxon, his teammate, along with Carson Kaplan. There was also Ian Turner and Daxton Wood of Columbine, I believe. Taki Diotis, I want to say, out of Cherry Creek was another good one. And then Gage Ginther was one that barely missed it, but in the games that we watched, not we, because it was Cody and Gideon, but they assured me that he wasn't quite there yet, but he got better as the season went on, so there you go. But it's about, playing a good full season and not just a good game or two, so that's what matters. Now, at defensive tackle, this was kind of another easy one. I mean, there weren't a lot of guys to really look at. There's Rocky Shields out of Columbine, Joe Van Meter out of Fort Collins, but we felt like Gavin Taylor and Brody Bleak were easily the best defensive tackles in 5A. And it wasn't super close. At least the best defensive tackles that also had the stats to match and met the playing time requirement. So boom. Now at edge, this was kind of tough here. Blake Purchase was locked in because, he's the sack leader in the entire state. But we had to go with Hayden Moore over guys like Caden Schaus, Brody Van Cleve, Theo Freyricks. Hayden Moore, kid, he's one of the tackle leaders in all 5A. I feel like that really speaks for itself there. Now, linebacker, this was a really tough one, but we went with Isaac Angle and Carter Daniels. I mean, they just had the best stats here. I feel like that was pretty obvious. But you have a lot of other guys like Ty Fave, Aiden O'Shan, K. Thomas, Zach Lewis. Zach Lewis made athlete, so I guess it didn't matter. Ishay Sieves, Brett Alvey, Angelo Petridis, Brock Colston, who were all considered for this here. But, we just decided the easiest way to go about linebacker was stats. And both these guys were very deserving of this. So, boom, there you go. At corner, Jordan Eason, he's been turning up for Pooter. He was an easy one there. And then we decided to put the 2 Pine Creek corners because they've been playing great. Not only do they also lead 5A in interceptions, but, they've caused a lot of problems for a lot of passing teams. So, bam, there you go there. At safety, this was kind of tough here, but we knew Logan Brantley, he's been a beast for Cherry Creek, so he had to make it. And then Cam Chapa out of Eagle Crest, arguably one of the best safeties in the entire state. We obviously kept in mind Caleb Davis from Cherokee Trail, Caleb Keith from Thunder Ridge, Gibson Leaf Green out of Grandview, Jason Tommy out of Ralston Valley, Trey Stott out of Valor Christian. There were a lot of guys to consider for safety here. This one was one that we had to talk about quite a bit here because there were a lot of different combinations we could have went with here. But I feel like Logan Brantley we felt like Logan Brantley really separated himself. And then Cam Chapa, he's been one of the best in the entire state. So there you go. We just had to make a tough decision, and that's what we came up with. Kicker punter was easy because it's stat-based, and then at athlete, it was pretty much between Zach Lewis and Mason Miller. Zach Lewis, he's a senior, plus he has better stats, so we went with Zach Lewis there. So boom, there you go. That's your 5A All Playmaker team. I'm going to put this out there because I think some of you, I'm pretty sure some of y'all are already typing up the hate messages because, but I'm going to say this, just because you did not make the All Playmaker team doesn't make you a worse player. Because as our top 5 seniors list comes out, top 5 seniors series comes out actually here in December, you're going to see that there are going to be guys that we rank in the top 5 and above that don't make the All Playmaker list. And, it's not because, they suck or whatnot. With All Playmaker, we really consider the full season, how much they've done for their team and whatnot. And there are a lot of great players out there, here in 5A. But this really forced us to make some tough decisions here, which we feel like Chassa doesn't really do with their all-state teams. So, boom, there you go. But that is the last end of the year award show. Make sure you go ahead and check out our other ones here. You can find that at Playmakers Corner on anywhere you can listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, YouTube as well at Playmakers Corner. And while you're there, go ahead and subscribe to us. Leave us a good review. And if you want to know when more content is going to come out, follow us on social media at Playmakers Corner on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And TikTok as well. We post content there. Highlights from games. We're going to be posting highlights from these great award winners. And we'll also be posting top 5 lists and also our top 10 moments. We're going to do that. We'll explain that later at a different time, though. This is not the episode for that. But a lot of content coming here soon, and so make sure you follow us and subscribe and do all that great stuff there. And show us some love, give us a like, give us a good review. We appreciate it. But thank you so much for rocking with us, and we'll catch you later.